right, let's get this thing going. What's up, everybody? Thank you for coming. Welcome. It's a very big deal in today's call. We're going to be talking about UFCW International President Mark Perone, his retirement, and what that means for us as UFCW members. We'll talk about what legacy Perone is leaving in the UFCW, what happens next in choosing the next president of our union, and then we're going to talk about the path of winning direct elections with one member, one vote here in the UFCW. And we're going to wrap it up. We've got some special guests. For me personally, hello everybody. If you haven't had a chance to meet me, my name's Eric. Like I said at the top, I'm from UFCW Local 8 up here in Northern California. And, I'm here participating in this call for one reason and one reason only, and it's that I want a voice in my local. When I got involved in rank and file union membership here in UFCW, I was really shocked to find out that there aren't very many avenues that we have as members to express our voice, express our opinion. Participating in our union isn't something that's directly encouraged by our union leadership. And, as a shop steward and, following that, as once that status had been taken away from me, I really tried to find ways that I could help make the FCW stronger and came up against roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And in talking about things like negotiating and participating in a bargaining room, found out that members weren't allowed there. And then when it came to like local presidents, officers, and our international president, I found out that our voice didn't matter there either, that those selections were made without our input and that we weren't a part of that conversation. And if we don't have a voice in our union, how can we be sure that our union's actually fighting for us? There's an accountability issue, I think, in the situation where we have people that are appointed and beholden by each other, or by people that aren't the direct rank and file membership. It's the same thing in politics as it is in our union. If you're not beholden to the people that hold the power of your vote, then you're not working for them. And I think a lot of us out there in our locals and the experience that I've had in talking to union members out there, I think they would agree that you can really feel it when your officers, your rep, your local president, you can feel it when they don't work for you. And I would assume that in those situations, those are situations where members don't have a vote and don't have a say in who that leadership is. The second that you take that power away from an appointeeship and you give it back to the membership, the power shifts to the members because they have the power to then change who that leader is. Giving the power to the members and one member, one vote is how you make sure that the people that are in those positions of power and want to stay there are doing the things that the rank and file members want. And the reward for that is continued votes. If we don't have that power, we don't have a voice in our union. And so I'm here to participate in this workshop and help facilitate because I think that getting a voice in our union, the UFCW, is one of the most important things we can do to help make positive change that restores dignity and respect to the working people down on the shop floor. The power of our union, where it belongs, is down on the shop floor with us, everybody on this call. And I think that every person's voice matters, their opinion matters. And I have my own opinion, but what I want to know is that I'm a part of a union that moves in the direction of the majority of its membership. And that's a union that I would be proud of, not one that I get dictated to from leadership from the top that tells me what I'm supposed to be doing and how I'm supposed to be behaving. So with that, I'm going to pass this off to Caitlin. She's one of the Essential Worker for Democracy national organizers. She's going to lead us in today's presentation. After we finish that up, we're going to hear from some special guests. Some of them are in the UFCW. We've got guests from the Teamsters and the UAW, and they're going to talk to us about the power of direct elections. At the end, we're going to have a question and answer portion. So if you have any questions that you would like answered, please use the function down at the bottom of the screen. And like I said, the people that have made these changes in their union, they're in the room with us right now. They're a part of this workshop. So they'll be able to speak to the power that some of us in the UFCW have never even been able to imagine. So with that, take it away, Caitlin.
Say thank you to Eric and thank you to everyone for being on this call today. It's so great to see people from all across the country and even some folks here from Canada participating in this movement to bring member democracy and a rank and file member-led union to the UFCW. So I'm going to be talking for maybe around 30 minutes about what UFCW elections look like, how they work currently, and why the system is broken. And then we'll hear from a bunch of very special guest speakers that we have from all across the labor movement, from the UAW, from the Teamsters, and rank and file members of the UFCW on the power of direct elections and what a difference it can make in unions when unions are member-driven and member-run. So to start, why are we on this call today? President Mark Perone has announced his retirement, or he's announcing his retirement soon. The official announcement hasn't been shared yet, and realistically, we're actually unlikely to see any official announcement of this stepping down or retirement until after a new successor has already been selected. So what happens next is that members of the International Executive Board are going to meet on May 13th and 14th, which is just 1 week from today, where they are most likely going to appoint his successor. So who is Mark Perone and what the heck is going on? Mark Perone became president of the UFCW in 2014 after his predecessor, Joseph T. Hansen, announced his retirement. Perone was then, I guess, confirmed or elected at the 2018 International Convention and re-elected in 2023, although he ran unopposed in both elections. The way that Perone was installed as president 10 years ago in 2014 is that every president of the UFCW has actually been selected this way since the union's founding in the 1970s through the mergers of the Retail Clerks Union and the Meat Cutters Union. Since then, every single president of the UFCW has been appointed through this undemocratic process where the current president announces a retirement early, and then the executive board votes and decides on the next president. So we'll talk more about that process in detail in just a second. But first, let's talk about the track record that Perone is leaving as he's leaving office. So one of Perone's biggest marks left on the union will be his impact on the UFCW's finances. Perone's term in office focused on growing the UFCW's assets. But what has that actually looked like? Since he took office in 2014, the UFCW's net assets have risen from $199 million to $521 million in 2022. So from 2014 to 2022, over doubled in assets. But over that same time period, membership in the UFCW has declined by 8% for a loss of about 106,000 members. So you might look at this image that you see on this screen and think that Perone must be doing something right if UFCW assets have grown this much under his leadership. But I would encourage you to think again. This asset growth actually comes from significant underspending to create budget surpluses, which means that your dues money effectively sits in the union's bank account or in Wall Street investments, rather than going into things like strike funds and organizing resources. This is a strategy that some union leaders use, which is called finance unionism, where they try to keep union finances growing by underspending rather than organizing new members into the union. So the UFCW has over $500 million in assets. And right now, if everyone could type in the chat really quickly, would you rather that $500 million in assets sits in a bank account and in stocks and investments in Wall Street, or used to support workers when it's time to strike? What would you guys rather do? If you were president of the UFCW, what would you do with $500 million? Okay, see, lots of people say support workers, people say strike. Someone says money not used is money wasted. Lots of people saying organize new members, hire more reps, organize more, support strikes, national strike, workers are the union, all caps, organize. Lots of people talking about organizing, lots of people talking about striking. So at least from everyone in this call and in this room right now, the pathway that Perone has led the UFCW down is not one that the majority of members, at least the majority of members here, think best represents our interests, right? So Perone is really proud of the assets that he's amassed, and one of his campaign messages to local union presidents who would be voting for him at the 2023 International UFCW Convention was that he had amassed enough assets to make certain that the UFCW pension plan for employees. So this is the pension plan that applies to staff and officers of the UFCW, not rank and file members like yourself, but people that work for the union. He campaigned on the idea that his investments and asset growth of UFCW's assets has enabled the pension fund for employees of the union to be fully funded. So this campaign promise has nothing to do with the needs of rank and file workers. It has nothing to do with your contracts, has nothing to do with your strike fund. It's about, the people that are paid staff and officers, many of them who were the people who were delegates to that 2023 election or to that 2023 convention. So another question I want to throw to the chat. If you were the president of the UFCW, would you try to grow union membership or union financial assets? Which one would you prioritize, membership or financial assets? Okay, see lots of people say membership. Membership. Eric says it builds the army. Tons of people say membership. Labor is our most valuable asset. Membership. Yuval says something that I think is really important, which is financial assets wither away when you don't get new members. So this is an important difference between the finance unionism model and the organizing model, which is that traditionally, or the way that the labor movement grew for many decades was by organizing new members into the union, and those new members would pay dues. And by getting new members to start paying dues, we would expand the amount of money and assets that the union has to do things like organize more members or pay strike benefits. But this new approach to union, I would call it union management rather than union organizing, is instead of organizing new members and investing money in organizing new members, we are cutting back our spending so that every year we have a budget surplus. And then we put that budget surplus into stocks and bonds and places in Wall Street, and then it grows as an investment. So instead of organizing new members, we're trying to grow our assets without organizing new members at all. And maybe it's okay to that leadership if union membership actually starts to decline. So speaking of strikes and of the strike fund, while many workers are bargaining new grocery contracts this year, put in the chat right now if you're bargaining a new grocery contract as we speak. Eric says bargaining, all caps. A couple people say yes. Not everyone on the call, but yes, yeah, a couple of people. Someone says not grocery, but bargaining at a nonprofit. Okay, a couple of other people saying yes. With these contracts being bargained right now, strikes and strike threats are definitely on the brain. But as I've talked to many grocery workers, and many of you are among them, who are worried about how they would pay their bills during a strike. So did you know that under Perón's leadership from 2015 to 2022, the union spent a total of just $5.3 million on strike benefits? So that's about $660,000 a year for the entire union, or 0.3% of total union spending. In comparison, during that same period, they spent $67 million on political activities. And in 2022, just 1 year, so rather than the 7-year period from 2015 to 2022, just in a single year, they spent $7.2 million on consultants and media companies. So more than all 7 years of strike benefits combined, just in 1 year. So in comparison, we can look at Unite Here. Unite Here is a national union for hotel workers, but they're much smaller than the UFCW. You wouldn't know that by looking at their recent strike activity and their press coverage in the news. And actually, I had no idea that they were only 262,000 workers nationwide, but compared to the UFCW's 1.2 million. But from 2015 to 2022, they spent $12 million on strike benefits, which is twice as much as the UFCW. How do UFCW elections work? How did we get here? The UFCW Constitution describes the process for electing a president of the UFCW at the international conventions. So these international conventions happen once every 5 years, which is the longest term of office allowable by law. So there's a law called the LMRDA that describes the democratic processes that all labor unions have to abide by. And one of the clauses of it says that unions have to have conventions at least every 5 years. Some unions choose to have them more frequently. The UFCW has the longest period allowable by law, which is 5 years. So Normally, delegates are elected in local unions, but oftentimes delegates to the convention are local union officers and staff by default. Members can be shut out from their local delegate elections or just not know when they're happening. But all in all, roughly 3,000 delegates gather every 5 years at the UFCW International Convention to vote on resolutions and elected officials. With each convention, fewer delegates actually have attended. And as we saw in 2023, many of these delegates are paid staff and officers. And while local unions are supposed to hold their own elections for delegates, a lot of them tend to obscure this process. And that delegate system tends to overrepresent smaller locals and dilute the votes of bigger locals. So you can see this disparity between the size of local unions, from the smallest unions to the biggest ones, and their vote share. On the side, we have votes per 1,000 UFCW members, and on the bottom is the size of the local. So this is another visualization of the vote share and the way that vote power of a single member can be diluted through the current delegate system, which affords a greater voting power, greater vote share to members that are coming from some of the smallest local unions in the country. So what we have proposed, and I'll talk a little bit more about the lawsuit in the next slide, is a reappropriation of the delegate system. So a way to make the delegate system a little bit more fair. So this is a comparison between the current system, which you can see right here, how many votes each local gets based on the number of members, versus the proposal that we put forward in our lawsuit to reappropriate the delegate system. To talk a little bit more about the lawsuit, we announced this lawsuit against the UFCW International in 2024. This lawsuit was put forward by two rank and file members of the UFCW, which is Kyung Berry and Iris Scott. We have Iris on the left and Kyung on the right. Iris is a member of Local 1459, and Kyung is a member of Local 3000. They're both rank and file grocery workers. The lawsuit alleges that the UFCW is violating the Labor Management Reporting and Disclosure Act, which I mentioned earlier, the LMRDA. So the LMRDA states that every labor union member should have equal rights and privileges under the law, but instead in the UFCW, what we see is that we have a rigged delegate system where members of some locals have a lot more power and much more powerful votes than others. One way it's been described by a journalist was that it's like the Electoral College on steroids. That's how the president is supposed to be chosen, using that delegate apportionment system that we have already argued is so broken that two rank and file members of the UFCW have chosen to file a lawsuit against the International in an attempt to change it. And we saw the way that this disproportionate vote share is given to members from some of the smallest locals that really dilutes the power, the voting power of members of other locals. And in addition, the UFCW International Conventions only happen once every 5 years. So that seems like a pretty messed up system. Clearly it's not working for membership, but it actually doesn't stop there. Even that is too much democracy for those in power. Instead, what happens is that, as I mentioned, every single UFCW president in our union's history has been appointed by the International Executive Board in a private closed-door meeting. What happens now, or how the next president will likely be decided, is by the 55-person International Executive Board. So they meet, they vote to appoint a president, and then they get that president rubber stamped at the next international convention, where more often than not, they run unopposed, or on what we call a white ballot, which is just one person running for office, because who would dare to run against the current International Union president? So the International Executive Board is made up of 55 people. In this next vote, it will be 54 because the president is one of the members of the executive board, but obviously they won't vote on who the next president is. You might be wondering who exactly is the executive board, like who's on it. And actually just a couple hours ago, we published a full list of every member of the executive board that you can find on our website. I'll make sure to put a link to this in the chat in just a second. This is not the full list up on the screen. This is only the first, maybe third, sorted in alphabetical order. So you can see whether or not these people, members of the executive board, are members of what we call the 250K Club, which is a report that we published last year about the finances of our union and which union, local union officials, officers, presidents, and international union officers and vice presidents make over $250,000 a year in compensation. In addition, members of the International Executive Board get paid a $20,000 kind of bonus for being on the executive board every year. They meet 4 times a year, twice in person and twice online. Again, the board is made up of some local union presidents in addition to some international union paid staff and officers, and there are no rank and file members of the union on the International Executive Board. Some of these local union presidents are former rank and file members, but there are no current rank and file members that sit on the executive board. So they select and appoint the next president in a private closed-door meeting that members are not allowed to attend. And in addition, executive board members don't have secret ballots. So that means that other executive board members can see exactly how they voted. That includes board members who are paid staff of the International Union and who answer directly to the incoming president. So imagine if your boss asked you to vote for him for something, and he would know immediately whether or not you did. This violates really basic principles of democracy because it can scare members into falling in line if they know that their vote is going to be seen by others. They can be pressured by other members of the executive board to vote in a certain way, and other members will know for certain if they did or didn't. So could people put in the chat really quickly, just as a thought exercise, how would you feel personally if you were someone on the executive board and you knew that everyone else would be able to see how you voted? You were experiencing maybe a lot of pressure from other members to vote in a certain way. What would you do? How would you feel about that? Okay, someone says intimidation tactic. Mason says unfair intimidation. Eric says that would suck. People say, I wouldn't like it, lots of pressure, I'd feel intimidated. So intimidation, I think, is the word that keeps coming up in the chat. And that really is, I think, the best way to sum up how the current system remains in place, is that this massive kind of power structure of intimidation keeps people in line. And even when people might think like, hey, I don't like the way that this system is going, I want it to change, they may be experiencing immense amounts of pressure and intimidation from other people that have vested interests in keeping it the same. So how do we change this? How do we get out of this hole? We have all these problems with our union election process. What can we do about it? Essential Workers for Democracy is fighting for UFCW members to have the right to vote through something called One Member, One Vote. Can you put in the chat right now if you're familiar with One Member, One Vote? Is this something that you guys have heard of before? Okay, lots of people say yes. Some people say somewhat. A couple people say not familiar. Some people say yes because of the UAW, is what I see Kathleen said. Just heard about it. Okay, just heard about it, but want a better explanation. Perfect. Glad you all are here. So One Member, One Vote is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of having a delegate system where delegates vote on your behalf, oftentimes those being delegates that you may have never met or you have no idea how they were selected, you didn't vote for them, you didn't even know that an election was happening. Rather than that system, in One Member, One Vote, every member has a 100% equal and fair say in who becomes the top officers of the union. So One Member, One Vote is typically done by mail, where members will get a secret ballot mailed to their house and you'll just mail it back in, almost like doing a mail-in ballot for a presidential election. So with One Member, One Vote, every member gets an equal vote for top officers. Leadership is accountable to membership, not to a small handful of delegates who are, again, are often paid staff and officers. Most importantly, members, not staff and officers, have power in the union. And with the support of the membership, leadership can bargain stronger contracts with more militant union tactics like coordinated bargaining, strike threats, and member organizing. All of the things that you guys were saying earlier in the chat about how you would, if you were in charge, you would be putting money towards the strike fund and money towards organizing instead of letting it sit in a bank and accumulate. Those strategies and tactics and decisions about our union would be made possible if we had the power to directly elect our leadership and make sure that we had leadership that was accountable to the membership, just as Eric was saying at the beginning of the call. So a common myth about One Member, One Vote is that it's expensive, that it's too expensive for a union to afford. In reality, direct elections are actually not very expensive at all. They cost about 9 cents per month per member, according to the American Arbitration Association. And as we talked about earlier, the UFCW already spends a lot of money on a lot of other things that members don't have any sort of accountability over or ownership over. And in addition, there's kind of an invaluable aspect of having a union completely owned and run by the members, being members in the driver's seat of the union. So another myth about one member, one vote is that members don't pay attention or they don't care about the union, so they wouldn't vote even if they could. What we say to that is that members don't get involved when they don't think what they do will make a difference. But every member cares about their contract and their experience at work. When members actually have a voice, they are much more likely to use it. And direct elections are one way that we can empower members to be more active. The way we see it, times when you feel like maybe your coworkers aren't paying attention to the union or they don't care about it, is a result of the ways that union members have become very disempowered and disenfranchised, even within their own union. And one member, one vote is one powerful way that we can put power back into the hands of the membership, and make members feel responsible for the direction of the union because they have the power to steer the ship. So the big picture of one member, one vote is that we start with one member, one vote, but we don't end there. That's not the end goal of the project. With one member, one vote, we can elect more militant leadership, and then we can organize and strike when we have to. Ultimately, that leads to winning stronger contracts and to build a more powerful, democratic, and militant union that can actually deliver for members on the shop floor, that can improve people's working conditions, can improve people's wages, can make sure that people have jobs with dignity, with high pay, with good health care. And that's really the goal of all of this. Democracy is great for democracy's sake, but that's not necessarily the end. The goal is to build a stronger, more powerful union that can really deliver for membership. So how has one member, one vote worked for other unions? To be honest, one member, one vote is not the majority of the labor movement, but some of the largest and most powerful unions have began to adopt it, and more are joining as the demand for change grows across the labor movement. The two examples we're going to talk about today in this call are the Teamsters and the United Auto Workers, or the UAW. So they both have one member, one vote, and in both cases, they were won by rank and file reform movements of members calling for the right to vote amidst major corruption scandals at the top. When the Teamsters and the UAW held elections where members had the right to vote, members voted for change. They kicked out the corrupt old guard and they elected new leadership committed to rank and file organizing and strike readiness so that members could win better contracts and better livelihoods. So one example of this is in the Teamsters. Their first one member, one vote election resulted in a win for Ron Carey, who just a few years later, after getting elected, led hundreds of thousands of UPS workers out on strike in 1997. This historic strike, which lasted 2 weeks, cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars and resulted in major wage increases and added job security for members. In the UAW, after winning one member, one vote in 2021, members elected UAW President Shawn Fain. Under new leadership, the UAW changed the old guard's finance unionism strategy of investing the strike fund in Wall Street hedge funds and private equity. And instead, the new leadership used those assets to fund militant and successful strikes, such as the one that we saw in 2023 against the big three automakers. So the results of that strike across 150,000 workers, 3 different employers, dozens of local unions across several states. Members won raises that ranged from 33% at minimum to over 160%. They had cost of living adjustments, which had previously been taken away from them in former concessionary contracts. They ended wage tiers. They had faster progression to top pay. They even reopened some closed facilities, and won improvements in retirement security. So this completely transformed the union and the way that people participated in the union. How do we get there? How do we win this for the UFCW? Technically, the only way to officially win one member, one vote on paper as a constitutional amendment is through passing a resolution at the International Convention. Because right now, the way that the delegate system is set up and the way that elections are set up in the UFCW is written into the Constitution. So in order to change it, we would have to pass a resolution at an international UFCW convention. So what's the path to passing that resolution? Is supporting rank and file members like yourself to run for convention delegate in your local unions. So the next UFCW International Convention won't be until 2028. That might feel like a really long way away, but it's a little closer than you think. And we need to start preparing now if we're going to win. Members can beat this rigged system by getting themselves elected as delegates to the next convention in 2028. And as an independent delegate, you can attend the UFCW International Convention, speak on the convention floor, and let the international know exactly what you think about union democracy in the UFCW. You can also meet members from other locals. And then we as a group can put forward a resolution for one member, one vote at that convention. That's one pathway to one member, one vote. But right now, there are several changes that the executive board can easily make, even with everything else staying the same, even outside of a convention year. So these changes include things like hosting open candidate forums and town halls, holding a national straw poll that the executive board can uphold. So they would send out like a survey or similarly to how a real election would go, send out ballots that you would then send back, and the executive board would be expected to reflect the results of that straw poll vote of the membership. Another thing they could do is settle the lawsuit that Essential Workers for Democracy has filed against the International in order to fix our broken delegate system. That they can settle that lawsuit without making constitutional changes at any time. But in order to fight this and to build this campaign, our next step is to join our letter writing campaign to local union presidents. So this campaign will help us put pressure on local union presidents, many of whom sit on the International Executive Board, in order to make democratic changes to the selection process this year. And by this year, I mean like within the next week. By sharing it with our coworkers at work, in Facebook groups and group chats, and other avenues to reach our coworkers, it also helps us build our list of potential candidates for convention delegate in 2028. We need all hands on deck to change things. So to summarize kind of our path to victory, right now we can start by sharing the email writing campaign with our coworkers. You can personally endorse the campaign and share information on social media, doing things like inviting coworkers to calls just like this so that people can get informed, have more information. And then eventually, as we get closer to 2028, we can prepare people to run for convention delegate, and we can also prepare people to pass resolutions in their local unions to support direct elections at the 2028 convention. And ultimately, this is about building a campaign that involves rank and file members to educate, inform, and empower the membership around the right to vote. So going back to this letter writing campaign that we're doing right now, this letter writing campaign started just a couple days ago. We have, I think, 64 letters sent, but we have a goal of sending 200 letters to different local union presidents. Many of these presidents sit on the International Executive Board, but not all of them do. Regardless of whether or not your local union president is on the e-board, it's important to send a message that members are paying attention and members have their eyes on international union leadership. It's another myth that people in power might use to say, well, they're not paying attention. They don't care about what's happening. And this is really our opportunity to sound the alarm and say that members do care about this. And members aren't going to just sit by silently while their right to vote is ignored. This is our letter writing campaign. We'll send a link to this in the chat and in a follow-up email. So you can just fill out the form on the right-hand side, put your information in, and then you'll go to the next page and it will automatically send an email to your local union president based off of the zip code that you enter for the field that says local union zip code. So one important part of this is that the form is a little bit tricky. In order to match you with the correct local union president and secretary treasurer, you need to put in the zip code of your local, not your personal home address zip code. So I think some people were confused about this. It is confusing. I apologize. We have on the Action Network form where you fill everything out, a list of all of the local unions that we have email addresses for that you can send an email to, and the corresponding zip code. So use that chart to find your local and double check that you have the right zip code and that you're entering it in this local union zip code field so that we make sure that it gets delivered to the right person. If your local union is not on this list, and this is not the full list up on the screen, there's a longer list on the page, But if on the longer list you can't find your local union, it's most likely because we didn't have the email address of your local union president. We couldn't find it anywhere. We searched high and low on the internet, which is kind of a problem. They should be easier to reach. But if you happen to have their contact information, you want to share it with us so that more people can send them emails, please feel free to do that. And I'll put in the chat where you can send that. So that's how you participate in the letter writing campaign. So once you fill out this form, there's a pre-filled email that you can edit however you'd like, according to your own voice. Put your own words in there and just speak from the heart about why you care about direct elections. And then that email gets sent off as part of a big campaign to local union presidents and secretary treasurers. Another thing you can do, and this is a little bit different from the one member, one vote piece, is to get your coworkers involved in paying attention to anything that's happening. For most of you that are bargaining contracts right now, I would highly recommend organizing this Strike Ready bundle where you can get Contract Unity pledge cards, buttons, and a weekly delivery of our newsletter, Essential Voice, that talks specifically about the issues that are happening right now in the contract campaign. So if you're a grocery worker, you're bargaining a contract right now, you can order a bundle on our website of buttons, pledge cards that you can get your coworkers to fill out. Once they fill out the pledge card, you will take a picture of all the pledge cards, send it back to us so that we can keep them updated with things about one member, one vote and about the contract campaign. And then you'll keep the card for yourself and you can use that however you'd like. What we normally recommend to people is to use it to build a group chat where you are starting to build a list of all of your coworkers and people that are involved in taking action around your contract expiration, and stay in touch with them outside of work so you don't have to constantly be worrying about whether or not your management is going to overhear you talking about union stuff or how to find this person. Once you have their contact information, building a strong group chat or other kind of meeting space outside of work using the Contract Unity pledge cards is a good way to help prepare your store for fighting for a good contract. But for now, I'm going to pass it back to Eric, who's going to introduce our speakers. So thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Eric, for being our chair.
Thank you, Caitlin, for an excellent presentation. Emotional journey for me personally as I went from rage and despair at how dire the situation seems to hope and possibility in union member power towards the end. We can do this, guys. And I saw a lot of questions in the chat about how we can do it. We covered it in a slide, but we have got some special guests before we hit question and answer. We're going to talk to some people who have made this happen and have lived through some of the nightmares of the UFCW. So some special guests. Our first guest is going to be Scott Holdison. He's the founding member of UAWD. That's the Unite All Workers for Democracy, the reform movement within the UAW. They fought for one member, one vote amidst a corruption scandal within their union. It resulted in a federal investigation into the leadership. They organized for their first ever direct elections of officers in the UAW and helped elect new leadership with Shawn Fain. We're lucky to have Scott with us here today. Over to you, Scott.
Thank you, Eric. I'm so happy to be here with y'all. My name's Scott Holdison. I'm a member of UAW Local 551 in Chicago. I work at the Ford Chicago Assembly Plant, and I've been a union member for 36 years. So one member, one vote was really a sea change for the UAW. The UAW for years was run by a single caucus, it was a one-party state. And then we won the right to vote in 2021, the right to directly elect our International Executive Board. And in 2022, 2023, it kind of overlapped the end of the year, we elected 7 new members to the International Executive Board. From there, we were hopeful that we were going to get a change in the culture of the UAW. In past contract negotiations, we would sit in silence waiting for our international leadership to come back with a contract and tell us what they got for us. And then we would go vote on it, whether we thought the contract was acceptable or not. We heard nothing from the time that first handshake took place until we got a tentative agreement. It was entirely different this time around. In 2023, they started contract negotiations, and President Fain was coming on Facebook Live telling us what the company was putting on the table, what the members' demands were, and how close we were, how far apart we were. And famously, in that first Facebook Live, he took the Stellantis contract, and Stellantis had put out an email to all the employees that they had in the UAW, and they put out an email that said, "Yeah, we're not asking for any concessions." And then President Fain held up the contract, rattled off all the concessions that they were demanding from the union, and then threw the contract in the trash. And then he rattled off our demands, and our demands were high. We wanted a 50% pay increase. We wanted to end wage tiers. We wanted pensions for all. We wanted health care and retirement for all. They were really high demands. We wanted our cost of living allowance back. Well, at the end of the day, contracts are a negotiation, so it's a give and take. But we ended up getting 25% wage increases over the length of the contract, with 11% loaded up front. We also got a better profit sharing formula, and we got our cost of living allowance back. And as Caitlin mentioned earlier, we ended wage tiers. So now it takes 3 years to get to top pay. Before that, it was 8 years. And before that, it was never, right? There were two completely separate wage tiers, where one would never reach to the top wage tier. So we've won those concessions back, but the amazing thing was just the transparency involved in our bargaining this time. Having those weekly Facebook Live updates about how the company was moving, and then at the Facebook Live updates, we would be anticipating whether we were going to go on strike, because they were calling strikes at certain plants each week. Locals would be sitting there watching their Facebook Live, anticipating, hoping that they'd be the ones that were called next. And at my local, we were called, and we were out on strike for about a month. In that time, we built solidarity on the picket lines. And it was really an amazing experience to be on the picket lines with all of our coworkers, getting to know people that you might not have met in your day-to-day interactions in the plant, because they work on a different shift or in a different department. So it was really a solidarity building experience. Before one member, one vote, strikes were fairly rare. In Ford, in fact, where I work, we had not had a strike since 1976. That was long before I started at Ford. GM had a strike in 2019, but that strike was pretty much just to distract from the trouble that our international president was in. He was under investigation and close to indictment, and he ended up getting indicted. So I want to provide a little contrast there. In 2019, when GM workers were on strike, they didn't get any updates about what they were on strike for. If you asked a worker that was on the picket line, why they were on strike, they would tell you because they want to end tiers. That was almost to a person. That was what they wanted. Of course, wage increases and other improved attendance policies, things like that, were always hoped for. But to a person, it was we want to end tiers so we can all be equal. And it was silence from the leadership. And at the end of the day, they were out on strike for 44 days without hearing anything about what was on the table. And they came back with a contract that they probably could have put on the put out to them, before a strike even happened. Mediocre contract that kept tiers in place, that was not up to standard. But knowing what kind of leadership we had at the time, the membership voted that contract in by a small margin. But contrast that with what happened in 2023 with the stand-up strike and the contract negotiations leading up to the stand-up strike. It was just a complete sea change. And that's in large part because of the leadership of President Shawn Fain, but it's also because the membership was driving these issues. We were submitting our demands to negotiators, we were submitting our demands to the bargaining convention, and making sure that the leadership knew what we wanted. So those conventions are really important, but they were very scripted affairs before President Fain took office. It's hard. It's a high hurdle to get over, winning direct elections at your convention, but you have to try, and you have to keep going after it, because in the end, that drive for democracy is what's going to define your union. And when you build on that, convention after convention, just keep coming after them. Eventually, you're going to get it.
Thank you so much, man. Shout out to you. You're an OG in the game. And to be honest with you, brother, watching you pull off what you guys did in the UAW, that was a big, like, radicalizing moment for me. That was an inspiration for me to know, A, that something was wrong in the UFCW, that something needed to change, and that there was a way to make it happen. So thank you for everything that you guys did at the time. I know that you were fighting for your own dignity in the workplace, but just know that you inspired a lot of other workers out there. And just to speak to the connection that you had with Shawn Fain, the membership power behind that, congratulations on your monumental contract. Thank you for your time, brother. I appreciate you. Next up, we're going to talk to Connor Hall. Connor is a rank and file member of UFCW Local 7 in Denver, Colorado. He was just on strike at King Soopers, a Kroger store, in February. Solidarity, brother. He's a member of the bargaining committee. He's seen firsthand just how our contracts can be affected by policies and decisions at the international union level. Connor was also a delegate to the 2023 International Convention. Thank you for being here, Connor. Please take it away.
Yes, we've been bargaining our contract, for the past 6 months. And I would just highlight that even for Local 7, we really pride ourselves on being a member-driven local. So we have our bargaining committee is 100% members. We have entirely open door bargaining. So if you're a member and you're not on the bargaining committee, you can still show up and join our committee there. So we have a really member-driven direction. And yet the international still has a lot of avenues to undermine our ability to bargain. I want to say I'm fortunate to be part of the local that I'm a part of. We maintain an independent strike fund, but for a lot of locals, the decision to go on strike, if you're going to get any sort of relief or benefit from that, you are entirely reliant on the international, both for any sort of strike pay, but also additional staff to help you, right? And that decision is made by a regional director, and that regional director is not an elected position. What that means is, while you may be voting for a contract democratically, as we say, like a strike is approved democratically. Ultimately, the decision of whether or not you're going to have any sort of to have the material resources to properly execute that strike is made by an unelected official at the international level. And many times, as international officials have said in our own bargaining, they have their own conversations with the company. And again, so the company has the ability to go to them to undermine our ability to bargain. Let me just speak pretty specifically to why even a strike benefit is really important. For most of us, we're not rich people, right? We're working class. Exactly, we're living paycheck to paycheck. What it means to be working class is that your access to food, your access to housing, your access to medicine is entirely contingent most of the time on your work. We can talk about the principle of it. We can talk about how, it should be your pride that you go on strike to get what's fair to you. But sometimes that choice is made for you by your paycheck, right? And for most of us, that's not the case. And so when the international has the ability to decide if and when you get relief, that undermines you there. Under our current constitution for striking, where the international president has the ability to force you to go back to the table if they, so say we reach a certain point in bargaining where like, hey, this isn't working, we need to have a strike vote. If they change even a single sentence in the contract that they're offering you, the company does, the president has the ability to force you back to the table. And that has been a recurring issue for Local 7. When we took those issues to the convention, so that was putting the authorization for a strike in the hands of the locals, that was trying to put guarantees of money towards strike funds for all these different issues. Universally, they were voted down, and particularly on issues around contracts. The line we were given from the international convention, from those other delegates, these established locals, frankly, the staff and the current establishment, is that they know better than the membership does. And I think it speaks to some of what we've been talking about, is that if you're a staff member, right? If you're not going to have to live under the terms of their contract, your interests are different. In fact, it is in your interest to have a peaceful relationship with the company, in a sense, and that, I think, that plays through. While at the same time that the international has this hostility towards member involvement, they're also completely averse to the idea of any sort of coordination between locals, right? Like I say, the international officials, they sit in on our bargaining in King Supers. They're there every time. They're just there taking notes. And I've approached them before, and they'll tell you that, in fact, what they compared it to is that being a member of the UFCW was like being in a franchise, that we basically got their branding, but they didn't really involve themselves. So while they're perfectly willing to use their power to undermine us, they have no interest in raising this as a coordinated issue. As I've had the opportunity to talk to people who are in bargaining currently and other locals, and as I think we've seen across the country, we're all dealing with the same companies. If you're in Safeway in California, then you're dealing with the same company as they are in Kansas. Across, exactly, right? We're having the same issues, and we're fighting for the same issues. We're fighting for staffing in our stores. We're fighting to protect our careers right now. And we're getting met with the same lines. The complete unwillingness to engage on these issues. So right now, coordination is particularly important, and we see the effect when bad contracts are won. Right? I think we've all seen the contract out of Atlanta. In fact, the companies bring up when they get a bad contract, they're thrilled about it, and they will bring it up in our bargaining. They want to drive us down, right? That contract in Atlanta, they brought it up in our bargaining. They said, well, Atlanta accepted this. Why won't you? And while I brought that up to our international representatives, they blamed it on the membership there. They said, well, if the membership didn't want it, they wouldn't have voted for it, right? So these things affect us. The only time the international, and as I've seen it in this current leadership, has gotten involved in our bargaining process, it is to undermine our power.
That was awesome, Connor. Thank you very much. Shout out to you guys out on strike. I got to hang out there with you, solidarity, and we're extended with you now, so hopefully we get a good contract. The thing that stood out to me there, especially coming out of Local 7 with Kim Cordova's leadership and the members fully involved from top to bottom, is that until we get leadership in the international that wants to hand the power back to the membership, we still have one hand tied behind our back. And knowing how hard Local 7 and some of the southern locals like 770 and 3000 up north, knowing how much you guys have been able to accomplish with that one hand tied behind your back is absolutely phenomenal. Think about how powerful we would be if we got both hands free. Thank you very much, Connor. We've got one more speaker left, maybe two. Sam Dancy and Enrico Romero Jr. are up next. Sam's a rank and file member of UFCW Local 3000 up in Seattle, Washington. He's on the bargaining committee at QFC. It's a Kroger store. And Enrique is a national organizer right here with the Essential Workers for Democracy and a former rank and file member of Local 3000 at Fred Meyer. Sam and Enrique were both delegates at the last UFCW International Convention in 2023. They saw exactly how some international union officers and staff treated rank and file members. Welcome, Sam and Enrique.
Thanks for having me speak here, and I'm glad that Sam and I can kind of share a little bit about our experience. So, Sam, what sort of reaction going into the convention? What sort of reaction from international staff and leadership when you and others brought forward demands for a direct member involvement and a direct election of international president? What sort of reaction did you expect, and what reaction did you get?
Well, I can tell you the reaction that I felt like we got, because once we walked in the room, we were loud, proud, and respectful. I felt that a lot of the international uh, presidents and stuff, I felt they were intimidated by what we were trying to accomplish. I will also say that the one that I did get the opportunity to speak on before that, we had a lot of other members that tried to speak, and it seemed like there was some kind of cahoots where a lot of our opportunities to speak, the question was called to order. So I think with the excellent leadership that we had, they made sure that the topic that I did get to speak on, which was the last day on a Thursday, they made sure that they put me in a position where I was going to be able to have a chance and be able to have a platform to speak on this. And I'll make it real brief. I'll never forget that day because it was an emotional day as I sit in the hospital recovering from pneumonia, and I'm sitting here watching the TV, and George Floyd is talking about how he can't breathe. Well, I couldn't breathe either, but ultimately I ended up breathing and George Floyd didn't get the opportunity to do so. So I'm speaking today on behalf of him. And I did notice that as I was trying to get through my speech, I managed to say a few things, but there was one person that responded out of all these friends that I supposedly have. And that one person was Faye Gunther. And she didn't ask, what can I do? She said, what can we do? And that's when the Black Lives Matter things came about. And so I was at least happy enough. And then probably within 30 seconds, good old Mr. Perone, he kind of cut me off. And I felt like I let everybody down. But as I was exiting the stage, I noticed that I had a lady that hugged me and said, look, I'm sorry what you went through. I appreciate you sharing your story. And later on throughout the day, a couple of my coworkers that were there that were delegates too, we were heading to a place to go get something to eat. And I ran into another person that I didn't even know who he was, but he attended. And he said, look, I appreciate your speech. Perone could have at least given you an opportunity to finish because it was the last day. And you're going to play this song, We Are Family, but you're not going to act like we are family. And in closing, what I'm going to say, I find it very, very ironic, or I'm not going to say ironic. I find it very interesting how the president of the United States doesn't get appointed, but yet still, and we have to vote on that. Whether or not we like the outcome of what happened, we do have to vote. And for our international to appoint another one, I don't think it's right. We did discuss what's called one member, one vote. I will say this in closing. I think it's very appalling that our president, Faye Gunther, who leads so many people, one of the biggest unions with 3,000 that I happen to represent, we don't get much of a say, and I think we deserve a lot more to say.
Thank you, Sam. And yeah, you're right. We met a lot of pushback when we brought forward our demands, proposals to change the international constitution, to have members at the international e-board, to have coordinated contracts and financial commitment to organizing on top of direct election, one member, one vote. I know when we were marching down the halls, we were met with name calling. We were met with just rambunctious crowds being surrounded by people, just kind of like thumbs downing us as we were just literally chanting for, putting members first. It was a tricky place to be, but nonetheless, I think both of our eyes were open and a lot of people were. So that being said, Sam, I know we fought up. We're fighting kind of upriver there, but we're keeping up the fight nonetheless. So what moments give you hope that a member-led UFCW is possible, Sam?
Well, the fact that Perone is stepping down, and I think that if we can continue to maybe initiate one member, one vote, that will give us an opportunity to maybe forge ahead. I forgot to say the fact that I'm also bargaining. Our group is bargaining too as well. This is our 11th bargaining. And I think that if we can have more rank and file members, that's the one thing that I was appalled with, to see that UFCW 3000, we had at least 28 rank and file members. And I think you need to give because they're the ones that are the future. Give them the opportunities to have a voice. One member, one voice.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for sharing. And I share the same I share the same hopes. I believe we can all take a little bit from this, and go back home, go back to work, and elevate our expectations not only from the employer, from the local and the international UFCW. So thank you, Sam, for sharing, and thank you, everyone, for giving us your time.
Shout out to Enrique, and good to hear your story, brother Sam. First time hearing from you for myself personally. Just something that I noticed there. We talk a lot about the generational divide in our unions, but I just saw it with my own eyes. It can be broken down. We are one union. We walk together, we win together, and we have one last special guest, Mr. Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell's been a Teamster since 1972. I was born in 1983. I feel like I know a lot about living on this earth. This man knows at least that much about being a Teamster. He's a UPS driver and a union rep for several Teamster locals, a longtime activist with the Teamsters for a Democratic Union, also known as TDU. It's a movement for union democracy within the Teamsters that was founded in 1979. We're very thankful to have Dan here with us today. Over to you, Dan.
Well, thanks a lot, Eric. I appreciate it. And I see my old friend Steve is on here, and a shout out to him and Caitlin and all my friends in the UAWD and essential workers here. I'm cheering you on every day. Well, what can I say about the Teamsters? The corruption and violence in the Teamsters is legendary. It's infamous. And I think you can, if you haven't seen the movie, you can go rent it or, see it on Netflix or something like that. It was a pretty violent place. I've seen in the comments, people worried about standing out, being intimidated. That is all a very real thing. And let me tell you how real it was in the Teamsters. We fought for the right to vote starting almost 50 years ago. It wasn't pretty. We were further behind in our efforts than even in the UFCW, in that international vice presidents and the president, the top officers were all selected at a convention that was a convention of officers. And people were delegates to that convention by virtue of being an officer in a local union. The only reason there were any rank and file delegates there is we had a proportional system, something that you're fighting for. That is, if a local was of certain size, they would have, there are 7 officers in a local union. Maybe they had 7 delegates. Maybe they had less. Maybe they were a small local and they only had 1 or 2 delegates. And then the president, the vice president would be the delegate. Anyway, if you were in a large local where they were apportioned more than 7 delegates, they had to have elections. And that's the only way we were able to get delegates to the international convention, whereby in those large locals where they had some elected delegates, and in a few local unions around the country where reformers were actually able to win office, they were delegate by virtue of their office. That's how I went to my first convention as a delegate. I was the only delegate in the entire Central States, I think, that was a reformed delegate. The intimidation, let me tell you about intimidation. Yeah. At that first convention, I remember we had a contested election. Sam Theotis from Cleveland put his name up against Jackie Presser, who you may have heard of. And there were 24 people at that convention of over 2,000 delegates who voted for Sam. It wasn't a secret ballot. No, you had to step up. They put a spotlight on you and you had to say your name, local, and who you were voting for. So, yeah, we didn't go anywhere except in groups and when we were out in Las Vegas for that. Fast forward to today, because I don't want to belabor that. The bottom line is we were an overnight success that took some 20 some years. And eventually, due to the corruption in the union, the Labor Department or the Justice Department went after the Teamsters, just like they did after the Longshore. and then eventually the UAW. And we intervened in that matter and said, hey, rather than trusteeing the entire international, why don't we do one member, one vote? And I know as part of the lawsuit, that's what's trying to be done in UFCW by essential workers for democracy. And I hope that's a success because that's more or less a quicker way to get to it. It was the quick way that UAW got at it, and eventually it was the way that we got at it. Now, yeah, things are a lot better when you have a directly elected president, but it's not a panacea. TDU, which I'm a member of, Teamsters for a Democratic Union, fought hard for right to vote. We petitioned. We had delegates. We made proposals. We did press. We did everything we could think of to cajole and move the union on for direct elections. It wasn't only until the Justice Department suit that we were able to intervene and suggest that we should have direct election, and they agreed. And rules were promulgated. Delegate elections were had where all the local unions now had to elect their delegates rather than the officers go. And through that process, we were able to nominate a slate way back in 1989-90, and Ron Carey was our first direct elected general president, as well as the executive board. Yeah, militancy happened. The slide in membership stopped. The transparency went way up, and we enjoyed several years of what a union could be, of a democratic union. But that's not the whole story. Eventually, we suffered from celebrity unionism, and a guy by the name of James Hoffa Jr. came along, made big promises, didn't have a clue what he was doing. You know, we used to say he would talk tough, settle short, and declare victory. By the end of the time that Presser was in there, Tom Leadham, who had run against Hoffa, got up at the last convention where he was presiding, and he said, you know, in the old days, we used to say that you would talk tough, settle short, declare victory. He said, who knew those were the good old days? Because they went downhill. Well, still, democracy is alive in the Teamsters. A movement of Teamsters united, where reform forces united and got together. Real democracy broke out in the union. Coalitions were formed. The old guard formed up their own coalition, you know, to try to keep power, and they were roundly and soundly defeated by Teamsters United with Sean O'Brien and Fred Zuckerman and the rest of the executive board. Now, TDU is an independent organization, and just in the same way that Essential Workers for Democracy is independent, and the way Unite All Workers for Democracy is independent. Very essential. We stayed together as an organization during the Kerry years. We certainly stayed together during the Hoffa years. We are not the cult of Sean O'Brien. We're not the cult of Fred Zuckerman. We applaud them when they're doing right, and much of what they're doing is right. As a result of direct elections and democracy are night and day over what we had under Hoffa, and way, way better than what we had before we had the right to vote. It was a nightmare, as been described by many people here with what you're going through right now in the UFCW. Worse. It was worse. The corruption was worse. The violence was worse. And the sellout was worse. So night and day. Now, organizing is on the rise in the Teamsters. Even in these difficult times, they're organizing about, I think they're averaging like 72, 73 members a day, some 70,000 new members. they're organizing everything from small shops to going after Amazon, which of course is huge. And that's going on right now as we speak. Transparency during bargaining, you bet. Non-concessionary contracts at our best in national contracts, UPS, for instance. Last time around, there was 60, 70 major improvements in that contract, eliminating tiers and raising pay and a lot of other improvements. So, yeah, democracy is a great thing. There was a book written by my old friend Mike Parker, now deceased, called Democracy is Power. I recommend that folks take a look at that and see if they can look up a copy. Democracy is Power by Mike Parker. And I really believe in the premise of that book, that if you want power in your union, you've got to have democracy. Of the 20 largest unions in America by membership, only 6, I think, have direct elections of their officers. Only 6 have that kind of democracy. And I think that the contrast between those 6 and the ones that don't have direct elections is probably very noticeable. It certainly is in the UAW and the Teamsters. So I'm going to stick around for Q&A too. That's a brief history of democracy and the Teamsters. Do not be intimidated by these guys. Somebody's got to step out and speak up. There were casualties along the way. Don't get me wrong, and there will be in any fight like this that's worth it. So yeah, intimidation. Stand up to it. Stick together. And that's my message. Thank you.
Awesome, Dan. Thank you so much. Good to hear from you, man. Much appreciated for your time and the fight that you just put through the history of the Teamsters to get all the wins that you guys got. Another inspiration for a lot of us that have just come into the labor movement. You know, this new wave of this new generation, it was the UPS contract and the UAW strikes that radicalized a lot of working people across the country. And you just heard from it right there. We talked to the past and we talked to the present, and everybody on this call is now a part of the future. So that's our special guests for the night. I'm going to pass it back to Caitlin for some Q&A. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out and taking the time for this call. A ton of good information. You got the information. How are you going to get it to everybody that you work with? We cannot do this alone. It takes all of us. And I'm right there beside you in this fight. Let's lock this in and let's take new leadership and new control over the UFCW and hand that power back to the membership where it belongs.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to Eric for chairing the call. And thank you to all of you for being here on the call. We will wait for a couple more minutes just to see if there's any questions. Sam has a question that I will answer right now, which is, how do we get access to the presentation slides and sources? A lot of the information on finance unionism, I specifically want to credit, comes from a union researcher named Chris Boner, and I can send that information in the chat. But we are going to send out an email with the recording and the slides and all of the resources that we talked about in today's call, hopefully by the end of the week. So by Friday, hopefully you should have in your email inbox a recording of the call that you can share with your coworkers who weren't able to make it, a copy of all of the slides and all of the sources and resources that we talked about in today's call. So that will be sent to you via email and also available on our website, which is EW4D.org. I'll put that in the chat as well. While we're waiting for any further questions that people might have, the last thing I wanted to say is that this moment is an important rupture in the power structure of the UFCW international leadership. Opportunities like this do not come around very frequently. As we mentioned on this call, Perón was appointed in 2014. So over 10 years ago was the last time there was something like this that happened in the UFCW, that we had a new international union president. This moment is a really important one for us to organize in, but it's also just the beginning in our journey for direct elections in the UFCW. As we talked about, this is going to be probably a long and sometimes difficult fight, especially as Dan alluded to and as Scott talked about. In other unions, this fight was not won overnight. People fought for these changes to their unions for years, but ultimately they won, they prevailed. And right now what we're experiencing is a lot of really important changes in the way that the UFCW is run in the union leadership. And we have the opportunity to seize the moment and to really push as hard as we can on the right to vote, on one member, one vote, and in making the UFCW more democratic and more accountable to the membership. So that starts with small things like the email writing campaign, but that can grow into building, strong local groups of members that are interested in fighting for the same thing, building up from there, getting people to be empowered to run for delegate in 2028. And a lot more will likely happen in between now and then. So just stay tuned for updates. Make sure that you're subscribed to our email lists. Make sure that your coworkers are subscribed to our email lists and that you're staying up to date with the information that we're putting out. We'll likely see a lot of new information come out over the next week, particularly after the executive board meeting next week on the 13th and 14th. So please stay tuned for additional information on how things are going and how you can continue to be involved and get more of your coworkers involved as well. Okay, so I'm going to start taking some questions from the chat. The first question I'm going to take is from David. It says, do we know if union leadership has been pushing back against these goals actively? We do know how they voted at the 2023 International Convention. We posted and published a scorecard of how every local union voted on particular resolutions that were put forward for democratic reforms and changes to the Constitution at the 2023 convention. I just put that link in the chat. It's called the Convention Vote Scorecard, and you can see how every local voted on every resolution that was put forward on issues like one member, one vote, first day strike pay, removal of the strike sanctions, which was the red tape that Connor was talking about earlier, investment in 20% of the budget to organizing. You can see how your local voted in those resolutions. And it's kind of a good guide for where things are now, just a couple years later. But if you have specific questions, it might be something worth asking your leadership about. Okay, another great question in the chat. Who are the candidates for the new president? We actually don't know. In the past, there's been a tradition of appointing the secretary treasurer. So that's how most UFCW presidents that have been appointed in this fashion have been appointed, was that they were the secretary treasurer first, and then they became the president when it was in their time. So we can expect that the current secretary treasurer will be one of the candidates, but it's not certain if there's going to be other candidates or not. And this is another example of the ways that this process has been really opaque to members, is that not only can we not vote, we hardly know who the candidates even are. We can do our best to guess, but it's another important part of a potential demand, which would be a candidate forum where the candidates could speak in front of all of the membership on a Zoom call, who could attend and ask questions and make their own judgments about which candidate would be the best decision for the union.